Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight we are learning Leilu Nishmat. It's my grandfather's yahrzeit tonight, the fourth year. We're learning Leilu Nishmat Rabbi Avram ben Reb Chaim Yehuda, as well as Leilu Nishmat Esther Bela bat Rav Ze'ev, as well as Yecheskel ben Rabbi Avram. We're also learning Rufua Shlema to Avram Yaakov ben Yal and Chava Bas Chaya Esther. So tonight we are we're continuing with the ninth Makkah. Baruch Hashem, we were able to get to here, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us, we were able to complete it. The ninth Makkah is Makkah's Choshech, the plague of darkness. So we're going to jump right into this. The plague of darkness, we know that as we're going through this series, that every plague corresponds to a different saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God created the world, meaning that God created the world in 10 sayings, and because Pharaoh denied God who created the world with 10 sayings, Pharaoh is going to get 10 plagues, each one corresponding to the 10 ways that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, 10 sayings that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. So this one is a very easy one to connect, and that is in Pasuk Gimel, the first parak of Bereshit. Vayomer Elokim yehi or vayhi. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Corresponding to that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away the light, and that hence we see the darkness. So this plague, when we're coming into this plague did not have any warnings. We know that the plagues were divided into 3 sections of 3, and in each section, the first 2 of them received warning. The final one did not. This is the 9th plague, so it's the third one of the third category. Makas Bechoros, the next one, the death of the firstborn, that's in its own category, but the plague of darkness, this is in the last category of its of the third section of the plagues, and that's why there was no warning. This came without any warning. Now, the way that this plague came about, now again, just to reiterate, when we're speaking about this, envision it. Use your imagination of what's going on and try to picture it. If you're able to use your whatever the power of imagination that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you, if you're able to utilize it, you'll be able to gain so much to actually feel part of what was actually happening. So the way that this worked was not that the sun just never came up. If the sun would have never come up and it just would have continued with the darkness of night, this the Egyptians would have thought maybe it's some sort of anomaly with the sun. Maybe it happens a certain period of time. The miraculous aspect of it was that the plague of darkness began in the most brightest part of the day. So in the third hour of the day, the sun is shining very, very brightly. That's when the darkness began. Now, how did the darkness begin? Moshe Rabbeinu extended his staff, and the way that the darkness came was that there was this dense mist that descended from the sky and blocked out the sun. Now, this is not a darkness like the darkness of night. And if anybody has lives or visited or traveled to a rural area where there's not street lights, where there's not any other light source, it gets really dark. And sometimes you can realize, especially if there's a full moon and there's no clouds and there's stars, you can see how much light the moon actually gives in pure darkness. This was not that type of darkness. It wasn't like a nighttime darkness. First of all, there was no moon, no stars. You weren't able to see anything. Not in the daytime, you couldn't see the sun. In the nighttime, you couldn't see the moon or you couldn't see the stars. This was pure darkness that there was no source of light anywhere. There was no source of any direction whatsoever. If the Egyptian would put their hand right in front of their face, they would not be able to see their hand. Now they have these museums. I always wanted to go. I was never able to get into it. They have it in Eretz Yisrael in Yerushalayim. Maybe they have it here. I don't know. But it's a museum of blindness. So what they would do is that they would put you in a pitch black room to simulate of what a blind person has to go to. And I believe there's a restaurant in one of the locations that you're able to go order food, and you're able to feel how they eat and how they sense their food and so on and so forth. So you get a feeling for it. That pure darkness is not still the darkness that we're dealing over here. The darkness that we're dealing over here, was a dense darkness. This was a darkness, it was like a mist darkness, it was a very thick darkness. It was, the Medrash compares it to like a coin, and we'll soon see why it compares it to a coin. So this completely blocked out the sun. This was like a crazy style fog. The Ibn Ezra was once traveling in the Atlantic Ocean, and he said that he came across this fog that was so dense that you couldn't tell if it was day or night. So you're talking about a completely different level of darkness that we can imagine or associate with. Now, it is important to emphasize that this is not a blindness darkness. This was a darkness, and let me explain what I mean by that. The Chassam Sofer was fought a very fierce fight against the works of Moses Mendelssohn. Moses Mendelssohn was the leader of the Maskilin in Berlin, and not only did he had bad ideologies, he put a commentary on the Torah, and the Chassam Sofer said that no one's allowed to study his commentary on the Torah. Why? Because there are certain things that we know based off tradition. Mendelssohn's work goes against all that. It's not even acceptable based on our traditions. And one of the things that he writes over here, Mendelssohn writes over here, is that the plague of darkness was actually blindness. It wasn't. Why did he come to that conclusion? Because he said very simply, how is it possible? We know the Jews didn't have darkness. The Jews had light. The Egyptians did have darkness. So how could you have one person in the same vicinity have darkness and one person does not have darkness? Very simple solution. It's blindness, and that's what the situation was. It was blindness for the Egyptians. Says the Chassam Sofer, absolutely not. And he brings a proof from the pasuk in Shemos in Bai, Perek Yud, chapter 10, verse 22, it says, it was a darkness. It doesn't say blindness, it says it was a darkness. Why says the Chassam Sofer, is it for sure that it wasn't blindness? Because he could have, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have done a blindness, a plague, just like he did for the people of Sodom. And the reason is, explains the Chassam Sofer, that when someone loses one of their senses, other senses overcompensates, meaning they become either hyper-aware or hypersensitive for different senses. And this is why you have people that unfortunately lose their sight or never had their sight to begin with. Their hearing is very good, their smell is very good. The other senses try to compensate for what it's lost with the blindness. But over here, the other senses in the Egyptians did not overcompensate. It was specifically the contrary. The way that it works, that if someone goes blind, chas v'shalom, then the other senses overcome it. But if someone does not go blind and they're sitting in darkness, so what happens is their other senses is not heightened, it's actually lowered because they are very, very confused and they're constantly trying to see. They're trying to project all their power that they have, emotional, physical, intellectual, into seeing, but they can't see. So all the other senses also go down, and it brings an additional sort of confusion. So explains the Chassam Sofer, in the plague of darkness, they didn't receive a heightened sense in other areas. They were confused they were confused, but we'll soon see that they were not so confused in all of their senses, specifically in their vision. So this type of darkness, this level, let's call it, of darkness lasted for 3 days. And during these 3 days, the Egyptians, they were able to move around, they were able to go around their homes, they weren't able to leave their homes, they were able to move around their homes, they were able to feel around, they weren't able to see each other, they weren't able to see themselves, but they were able to move. And if they tried to, let's say, light a candle or light a torch, it immediately was smothered by this darkness, which, just as a side point, makes sense because it was a thick darkness. It wasn't something that was be able to. We're not going to get to speak to this, but there was even aspects of fumes that were related to this, and it was a miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu let them breathe and not these fumes, and not go and die from it or be harmed from it from the fumes aspect. But in any case, for 3 days they went through this darkness. For the next 3 days. Oh, and also during these 3 days of darkness, the Jewish people, we know, also had light in their homes. However, even though they had light in their homes, we know that this was not a happy, pleasant time for the Jewish people, because we know during this plague, the unworthy Jewish people that were not worthy of being redeemed, they perished during this plague. And the Medrash tells us that 80% of the Jewish people, they died in Makas Choshech, in the plague of darkness, because one of the main reasons were because they did not want to leave Egypt. They didn't want to leave. They were happy where they were. There were some Jews that they enjoyed this close relationship with the Egyptians. They collaborated with the Egyptians. Unfortunately for the on the heads of the Jewish people, where they forced them to work, the Jewish people, and they gained wealth and they gained some sort of power. So they lived a little bit more of a comfortable life than the other Jewish people that were in actual slavery. They were like the one level above it, and hence they were not interested in leaving. They wanted to stay where they were, and because of that, also, they were not interested in accepting the Torah. They did not want to risk traveling in the desert. Desert travel back then, even now, it's dangerous, but back then it was extremely, extremely dangerous. So they had some reasons of they rather stayed. Because of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu went and killed them all out during this plague. They were not worthy, and we'll soon see why. But they were not worthy to leave Egypt. But the question we have to ask is, even though you have these Jewish people that they didn't want to leave Egypt, they were, let's say, more comfortable than the other Jewish people. But like, how much comfort do they have, right? They were in a nation of slavery. They were still in the category, we'll use air quotes, they were still in the category of slaves. They still had pain, they still had affliction, they still had persecution. But how are they not running to leave Egypt? Okay, so you could say, okay, they had a little bit of a bigger home. They didn't work as hard as everybody else. Like, why did they not how did they not realize there's so much better stuff going on out there? Furthermore, we could ask an additional question, is they saw all the miracles that God performed on behalf of the Jewish people against the Egyptian. Who wants to be on the losing team, especially if you're originally on the winning team? Why would you say, okay, wait a minute, you see God performing all these miracles, right? 8 miracles already happened. 8 plagues already happened. You see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is choosing sides. You see that there's something going to happen. Everybody's speaking about the redemption. Everybody's speaking about the Exodus. People are leaving. Why would you not see that and just go to the winning side, which is your side anyways to begin with? So how is it that these Jewish people, how is it that they didn't see this and switched their mindset to the right side to go and follow the Torah, follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu, follow the Yidden outside of Egypt? So Rav Chizkiyahu Cohen answers a beautiful answer. There's a Gemara in Brachos, page 5a, that says that a person should always arouse his good inclination to fight his evil inclination. You should always go and take your Yetzer Tov and fight your Yetzer Hara. But the Gemara continues, if you do not overpower your evil inclination, then what you should do, you should learn Torah. And then the Gemara continues, and if that still doesn't work, and your evil inclination is still strong and it's still fighting against you, then you should recite the Shema. And if that still doesn't work, then the final category, the Gemara says, to overcome the evil inclination, think about the day of death. So the obvious question that we can ask, we're like, wait a minute. If the best solution is to think about the day of death, why do we have to, learn Torah and then say Kriya Shema and then think about that? Let's just jump to the end, to the known way that it's going to go and win. It's a known factor that's going to win. Let's just go and skip to that to that level. And Rabbi Cohen answers that the educative power of thinking and contemplating of the day of death applies only to someone who has already studied Torah. Meaning that if somebody can appreciate the value of Torah, is inspired by Torah, is humbled by the Torah, then you can utilize that thought process and think about the day of death. Based on all your knowledge that you learned, you are able to now go and say, okay, wait a minute, maybe I should stop doing it. But somebody who has not learned Torah, who has not been refined by Torah, if they start thinking of the day of death, they could think about the other extreme, right? We know that, the other extreme is eat, drink, for tomorrow we may die, and you have to just go and do whatever it is that you can. So therefore, you need to have Torah first. And once you have Torah, then you have the ability to go and really contemplate in the correct manner what the day of death really represents and how it should wake you up from the troubles and the tribulations that the evil inclination is throwing at you. So we see from here, there are those people, specifically in the times of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt, that have sunken so low that nothing would have inspired them at this point. Some people, unfortunately, they don't look for growth. They're happy the way that they are. They're not interested in changing. They don't want to become better people. They want to stay the angry, miserable people that they are. They're not looking for spiritual growth. These people, by the way, very, very difficult people to deal with. The people that you want to deal with, the people that you want to marry, the people that you want to connect with, the friends that you want to have, are friends, are people, are marriage partners that are always striving for growth. Because if somebody's striving for growth, that means that they will always become better. they will always be they'll be a better spouse, a better parent, a better, child, a better friend, a better aspect than anything. But you have sometimes people that are just stuck where they are. And the most foolish saying is, you should love me, you should appreciate me for what I am. Which in a sense, as foolish as it is, has a tremendous amount of truth in it. Because really, the other person should appreciate you for what you have. But what happens is, when you say that you should accept me for who I am as of right now, what you're not only saying to the other person, you're also saying to yourself, this is who I am. I have certain issues in life. I have anger issues. I have this issues. I have lazy issues. Whatever issues that you have, you're saying, this is who I am. When you identify as part of your issues, guess what? You're not going to change. You are going to stay exactly the way that you are because everybody else has to accept you. So certainly, you should accept yourself. Now, of course, in today's day and age with emotional health, you should be very, very acceptant of you, who you are, to yourself, but at the same point in time, do not feel like you're okay where you are. We should always be striving for growth. We should always be striving to do more. We should always strive to become a better person. But when you have people that are not interested in growth, they just want to stay with the way they are, even if you have a miraculous event being thrown in their face, they will not be impressed with it. They will just be inclined to go towards evil, towards the same way that they were. And unfortunately, these Jews in Egypt, they did not deserve to leave. They did not, they were happy where they were. They were not interested in changing. They were not interested in any growth. They were happy and content with the way that they were. Now, this, unfortunately, is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to go and get rid of, I don't know what the nice way to say it, of all the Jewish people that were not worthy of the redemption. But why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu why did God specifically do it in the plague of darkness? Like, it could have been done at any time. And the answer is because God did not want the Egyptians to see the Jewish people bury their dead. God did not want to see that the Jewish people are suffering, are going through difficulty. Now that question is why? What's the big deal? The Egyptians are in so much trouble. They're going through so much difficulty. Like, you think that it's going to make a big difference if they see another Jew, that they have to go to another grave over here, another grave over here. Like, they're literally burying their dead nonstop, the Egyptians. And the answer is, the beautiful answer. There's a Gemara in Pesachim, page 118a, that says something very, very difficult to understand unless you go and try to delve into it. And that is, making a living, the Gemara says, is twice as hard as childbirth. Now, all the women are going to jump up and be like, excuse me. Say what? Like, come again? Making a living is twice as hard as childbirth? Yeah, like, say that after a man can go and give birth to a child. And Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein explains as follows. What is the reason for that? The reason for that is that, what's the difference between childbirth and earning a living? So, in childbirth, every woman, they could be rich, they could be poor, they could be anybody in between, they could be the Queen of England, they could be the poorest person in Afghanistan, they all go through, unfortunately, pain and suffering during childbirth. Now, it's not all the same degree. Some are less and some are more, but all women go through a degree of suffering in childbirth. Because all women go through this suffering, they're not envious of one another. Every mother, more or less, bears the same type of burden. But this universality of consistency throughout everyone is not applicable in earning a living, in parnassia. Because you have people that are poor, that are destitute. You have other people that are extremely wealthy, and they're flaunting it, and they show it. But so you look at the poor people. The poor people, besides dealing with their financial straits, besides dealing with their financial difficulties, they have an additional stress. And that is the stress of seeing others enjoy a lifestyle that are beyond their means, that they're not able to, they're not even to be able to put the basic necessities, and they see people that are going so much further than them. So they have this additional issue, additional pain, additional suffering that they're going through because they have this emotional suffering that they see, wait a minute, this suffering is not just it's not for everybody. This is just for me. And there is a famous saying. There's a tzaras rabim chatzi nechama. The pain, the suffering of the multitude, of the many, is a little bit of a consolation. Meaning that if everybody is going through the same thing, okay, so you're able to deal with it a little bit easier for people that, let's say, are in school or in college. If everybody fails, you don't feel so bad that you fail. Be like, the teacher is crazy. Right? It's always about the teacher, right? The teacher is crazy. The teacher is so difficult. They ask questions that no one ever heard of. It was from a different language. It was written in Mandarin, and the answers had to be in Cantonese, and it wasn't even a language class. All these excuses. But if everybody's going through the same difficulty, so then okay, fine. There's no envy. There's no jealousy. There's nothing going on over here. But if everybody got a 90 or 100 and one person got a 34 and a half, then that person's suffering is so much greater than if everybody else got between a 20 and a 60. So the suffering is greater because there's an emotional aspect to the suffering that goes along with it, and that is the difference between earning a living and childbirth. Childbirth, everybody goes through suffering. But earning a living, not everybody goes through the same suffering that other people go to. And explains the Maggid of Dubna. Sure. We'll leave the questions for afterwards. We'll continue straight, and then we'll answer other questions. The Maggid of Dubna brings a point over here, a very famous story, and that is a story on from Shlomo HaMelech, from King Solomon, where there was two women that were fighting, they were arguing. What happened was that there were two women that recently gave birth and had babies, and they were sleeping in the same house, and one of the babies died, and one of the women claimed that the baby that the mother of the baby that's no longer alive switched for her live baby, and now each one is claiming that this live baby is really theirs. So they both came to Shlomo HaMelech, and the first one came, and the first one said, "No, the dead one is your son. The living one is my son." The second woman said, "No, the living child is my son. The dead one is your son." So Shlomo HaMelech, we know the story of the Shlomo HaMelech offered to go and cut each one in half, and he figured out that who is the one that's the real mother. The real mother is the one that is the second one, not the first one. But explains the Dubna Maggid a completely different twist on the story. And how did Shlomo HaMelech come to that conclusion? Said the whole thing would be like Shlomo HaMelech would go to these two mothers and be like, okay, wait a minute. He says, you're both right. I don't know what to say. Let's cut the baby in half, and each one will get you have. So one woman said yes. The other woman said no. Let the other woman have the baby. I don't want this baby to be killed because of this. So Shlomo HaMelech said the woman that wanted to save the baby, that's the woman that's the real mother. But that, explains the Maggid, was just the layer of the additional, the final proof that he needed. Shlomo HaMelech already knew beforehand who is the right mother and who is not. Explains the Maggid. How did Shlomo HaMelech know this? So he said when the first woman came in and said that she really deserves, that this baby is really her, said how did she come into, how did she phrase it? She said the dead one is your son and the living one is my son, meaning that it was more important for her. She had no intention of raising this child on her own. It was more important for her that her friend does not have a child. Why? Because she had this emotional suffering. She really had a child. Her child really died. But what the difficulty was is that she didn't want her friend to have a child that was alive, because it was all the same time. There was a jealousy aspect of it. And that's why, how did she start off her statement? She didn't start off her statement that the live one is mine. She said, no, the dead one, that's yours. The live one is mine. The second woman said, no. She emphasized on the live one, and that's why she started off. No. The living child, that's my child. The dead one is yours. Shlomo HaMelech said you could see which one emphasizes on which, based on which one put one first. So the first one, she just wanted it to be dead. The second one, she just wanted to focus on the live aspect of her child, and that's why, says Shlomo HaMelech, that the first one was false, and really the rightful mother was the second one. And this explains the Dubna Maggid, what was going on during the Makas of Choshech, the plague of darkness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu unfortunately had to go and destroy part of Klal Yisrael. But he didn't want the Egyptians to notice the downfall of the Jewish people. Why? Because if the Egyptian would see the Jewish people die and the Jewish people suffering, so it would be a little bit of a nechama, it would be a little bit of a consolation to them. Okay, it's not so bad. They're also going through the difficulty. They're also going through the suffering. And hence, that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically did it in Makas Choshech, and where the Egyptians would not be able to see the suffering of the Jewish people, because the Egyptians would not get any benefit whatsoever out of any of the plagues. And Rav Schwab brings this into another, brings the cherry on the top and said that it's very simple. You can see this in the Pesachim in Shemos chapter 10 verse 23. It says Lo yira'u ish es achiv. The Egyptian did not see their brother. It did not say they did not see any other man. They did not see es achiv. They did not see their brother. What does that mean? What does that mean? They did not see their brother? Like if they realized that even if they realized all the Egyptians were suffering in the same thing, it would have been a little bit but they didn't even know what was going on. Each one wasn't kind of in their own world per se. So each one couldn't see their brother. They couldn't see what the other person was suffering from this. And this, says Rav Shab, we learned something very important. And that is that when someone is suffering, the very least that you could do is at least sympathize with them. This somewhat brings some sort of nechama, some sort of soothing to minimize their pain. And listen to what Rabbi Fran brings down from the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. So we know that the 80% of the Jewish people, they died during this makkah because they didn't want to leave Egypt. So Targum Yonasan ben Uziel brings an interesting point. In Parshas Beshalach, which you're talking about a week after the Jewish people left Egypt. The Jews are no longer in Egypt, right? The Jews that wanted to stay in Egypt died. The Jewish people that left. And, so now you have just the Egyptian. And then in Parshas Beshalach, the Torah tells us that the Jewish people were lost. They were aiming sort of like aimlessly in the midbar, in the wilderness. And the pasuk says, V'yomer Paro livnei Yisrael nevuchim heim. Paro said to the Jewish people, they are lost. Asked Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, what? Who did he say this to? He said this to the Jewish people. The Jewish people left. They were gone. Who is he spoken to? They were gone already for a week. Anybody that wanted to stay died. Everybody that left already. So what is Paro saying? Vayomer Paro livnei Yisrael to the Jewish people. They're lost. Who? Which Jews? There's no Jews left in Egypt. Answers the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. You know who he was talking to? None other than the infamous Dathan and Abiram. Dathan and Abiram, the Maral Diskin goes and explains that, first of all, tries to clarify, wait a minute. If Dathan and Abiram did not want to leave Egypt, why didn't they die in the plague of darkness, in Makas Choshech? And Reb Chaim Kanievsky adds a question on this. We know that during the plague of darkness, the Makas Choshech, the Egyptians were not able to move, right? In the final stages, they were stuck, they were frozen over there. But the pasuk tells us that Paro called Moshe Rabbeinu. How did he call Moshe Rabbeinu? How was he able to call Moshe? He was frozen in place. How did he call Moshe Rabbeinu to come and end this plague? And the answer, says Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, that it was Dathan and Abiram were usually hanging around near Paro. And they served as his advisors. So they didn't have the plague of darkness. So Paro starts screaming, anybody here? Dathan and Abiram says, hey, what's up? What's going on? He says, call Moshe Rabbeinu. And they went and they called Moshe Rabbeinu. So ask again, the Maral Diskin, what happened? These are Dathan and Abiram. These are not good people, right? They were, they eventually joined Korach and they eventually died in that. But they were not the best. They caused a lot of difficulties for Moshe Rabbeinu. They're the ones that told on Moshe Rabbeinu when he killed the Egyptian and he had to escape Egypt, and when he was a prince, there was problems after problems. Why did they survive? How did they survive? They should have been one of the first to go. Explains the Maral Diskin. He brings this answer from a medrash that Dathan and Abiram, they were the policemen. They were the level above where all the other Jewish people are, and they were enforcing the Jewish workforce. But there was something very, very special with Dathan and Abiram, and that is when the Jewish people did not reach their quotas, the Egyptians would beat the Jewish people. But they would go to the Jewish policemen and say, okay, who deserves beating? The Dathan and Abiram, these Jewish policemen, they said, no, we're not telling them on our brothers. And what happens was the Egyptian told them, says, if you're not going to tell us who was slacking off and who was not able to create the quotas up to par, then you're going to be beaten. And they said, so be it. And they got beaten instead. They took the beating instead of their Jewish brothers and sisters. So explains the Maral Diskin based on this medrash that anybody who is empathetic enough towards other people that they're willing to suffer to save others from being harmed, that is an extraordinary merit that we cannot even begin to understand. And this saved Dathan and Abiram from death. This gave them the ability that even though they were not the best people and far from it, but because they had this empathy, because they shared in the suffering of their Jewish brothers and sisters, that saved them from the death, to the point that they were even the ones that stayed in Mitzrayim after everybody left. The son of the Baruch Tam, the Baruch Tam was Rav Baruch Frankel to Umen. He met with his son got engaged to a girl, and he went to meet to finalize the engagement. He went to meet the girl's parents, the Kala's mother, the Kala's father, and at this meeting, the Kala's mother looks at the Baruch Tam, and she sees that he's very distressed. So she's like, "Is everything okay?" He's like, "Is everything okay? Is anything wrong with the shidduch? Is there something wrong with it?" So he's like, no, the shidduch is fine. I'm just very, very worried because the water carrier in our village is very, very sick. Now, to begin to understand the water carrier was someone who brought water from the river, from a nearby water source to the people's homes. The water carrier was very low on, let's call it, on the totem pole of society. They usually had less intellect, more muscle type of people, and this is what they did for their parnassia. So the Baruch Tam was very concerned about this the water carrier. So the Kala's mother says, "Why are you allowing the water carrier's sickness to disturb you so much?" She says, "You shouldn't allow this to ruin. This is a very happy occasion. Our children are getting married. You shouldn't go and allow this to ruin this happy occasion." The Baruch Tam hears this, stands up, walks out of the room, and says the engagement is off. He says, everyone came over and said, "What do you mean the engagement is over? What was wrong? What happened?" So he explained, he says, "I cannot allow my son to marry into a family that is lacking the basic Jewish trait of empathy. If they cannot have this empathy of feeling pain when other people are suffering, I want nothing to do with this family." And this explains the Chidushei HaRim. This is what the darkness, the greatest source of darkness, explains the Chidushei HaRim, is when somebody is unable to see the suffering and the situation of their brother, their sister, their friend, their family. They're not able to see it. The plague of Choshech was more than just a plague of darkness. There was a tremendous lesson that is coming out over here. And that is, explains the Chidushei HaRim, that if you have somebody that's involved in Torah, in Yiras Shamayim, and working it, they're always going to show empathy. But people that are not, they're not going to show empathy. Rabbi Biderman brings down a story that there was a rabbi who went and he felt like he made a neder, he made a vow, and he needed to be matir the neder. So the way that you matir a neder, you have to get a bezdin, you have to get 3 people, and there's different ways you have to figure out what's the right, what's the Pesach of the Torah. There's different ways that you have to you have to annul the vow. So he goes over to the Chazon Ish, and he says, B'nai Brak, and he says, "I need to be matir the neder." So the Chazon Ish was learning. He said, "We're missing one person." He was learning with another person, but basically we're missing one person. So he tells this rabbi, he says, "Go outside, find a person, bring them in, and we'll do the hataras nedarim." So he goes outside. He finds a person walking by. He says, "Can you do me a favor? Can you come in with the Chazon Ish? We need to do hataras nedarim." He says, "Sure, not a problem." Comes in. The Chazon Ish goes and asks some questions about the neder, and then he gives instructions, to the bezin and what we're supposed to do to absolve the neder and what angle and how how it works according to halacha. And he went through it, and then all the 3 men that were the bezdin, they said mutar lach 3 times, and everybody thanked the 3rd man who walked in from outside and walked outside. As soon as this 3rd guy walks outside, the Chazon Ish goes over to this rabbi who came over and he says, "Listen, you got to find another man. We got to do this again." So he says, "What do you mean? We just did it. Why do we need to do it again?" So the Chazon Ish says, as the man that came in was very, very clearly unfamiliar with the basic halachos of hataras nedarim, and therefore it should be performed again. Now, the Chazon Ish was very careful with his time. He picked this up immediately, but there was a stranger that walked in. There's a stranger that came in. How is he going to tell the stranger, okay, we're okay, we're going to find somebody else? He says that's going to insult the stranger. That's going to hurt the stranger's feelings. He says even though it's going to take time to explain everything, he says let's go through the process and then we'll do it again just to not hurt this person's feeling. And this is the power of when you learn Torah and when you grow in Yiras Shamayim, you have the power to see the suffering of others or foresee the suffering of others and prevent it, from happening. And this is the darkness, the blindness that sometimes other people have. We don't see the suffering of our fellow brothers and sisters. And this was the sign and the lesson that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Pharaoh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Pharaoh, you're blind, you're in darkness, you cannot see what's happening right in front of your eyes. There's a symbolic message that's going on over here. There's a medrash, a very fascinating medrash, that says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked the angels on the plagues. Should we do it? Should we not do it? And this is the custom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All the other plagues, there was difference of opinions. No, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. There was a discussion. But the plague of darkness, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked the angels, there was no rebuttal. There was no argument whatsoever. Why not? If all the other plagues, there were other angels saying, well, maybe this, maybe that. Why was there no response from the angels on the Makkah of Choshech? And the answer was because this was a sign. This was a warning, so to speak. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Pharaoh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling the Egyptians, you guys are blind. You gotta open your eyes and see reality for what it is. And this explains what Rabbi brings it down, that this is why the Medrash brings down that the darkness was like as thick as a coin, as a dinar. What does that mean? Darkness is thick. Darkness is an absence of light. What does that mean? It's thick like a coin. If you want to say a thickness of something, why specifically utilize a coin? And the answer is because there's a few things that causes blindness to people. One thing that's on the top of the list is money. Money causes people do crazy things for money. Money causes blindness. People go and they will spend 18, 20 hours working every single day. And then finally they go and they retire when they're 65. Why? Because they want to spend time with their family. Says Rabbi Fan, which family? Says your family was gone, right? The maid raised your family, like the helping crew, they raised your family. Your family is grown and moved out. There is no family for you to spend time with anymore. People are blinded by their desire for wealth, their desire for materialism, their desire for certain desires. They're blinded by it. And this is why the Medrash compares the darkness, the plague of darkness, to a thickness of a coin, because it's a symbolic plague. It's a plague that teaches us tremendous amount of lessons. That it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Pharaoh and telling us, don't be blind to what's going on around you. Don't be blind to what's real in life. Don't be blind to what's true in life. Don't go and chase after falsehoods. Don't go and chase after things that don't last. And this explains Rabbi Victor Miller. This is the difference between, this is what the Egyptians had, and also, says Rabbi Victor Miller, also the other nations of the world. The other nations of the world, they all live in this dense darkness. And it's a darkness of error. They live a life of falsehood. They live a life of error. Who does not live a life of error? The Pasuk tells us, the Jewish people had light in their dwelling. You know why the Jewish people? There's only one way to get light into your house, into your life, into your. When I say light, I mean clarity, reality, and that is through Torah, through HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only the Jewish people got the message of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. There are so many people that live in darkness. Unfortunately, you have the people in the secular world. You see how far morality has fallen, right? So you think, okay, people in the secular world, they have a common saying, and the common saying is, what's the difference? We'll just be good people. You'll be good people based on what? Based on whose parameters, based on whose ideologies, based on what circumstances, based on what foundations do you define what is good? And we see how far the world has fallen to. People can see what's okay, what's right, and what's not is so radically wrong. You have people that support terrorism, that support the worst of the worst, and they convince themselves that this is correct. They support the murdering and the raping and all the bad stuff they support, and they say that this is the right thing. They support the abortion. They support, mental illness in the worst way, that the people are suffering through something, and they go and they promote that suffering and they make it even further. People that have these gender, roles that they cannot begin to understand that this is a mental health issue, and instead of dealing with it, they say, no, go further into the illness and go further into the whatever the issue that you're going on. Never ever has anything come out positive. People that it's a scientific fact. You can look at the numbers. Statistically, it doesn't lie that people that you think, okay, gender, with all these role switching and the fluidity, you think, okay, people will be happier. No, they're not happier. The reason is because whenever, and you speak to anybody in a psych major, anybody who's a psychologist, psychiatrist, anybody that has some delusions, you're not supposed to go and speak into those delusions. You're not supposed to go and say, yes, you're right in those delusions. You're supposed to go, no, if you're hearing voices that are saying to kill people, that is bad. That is wrong. And just like that is wrong, so too many other things are wrong. But yet, the secular world is so far off and is so far in darkness that we say, okay, this is right and this is right and this is right. And even though it's very, very far from right, it's wrong. They're making radical errors because they live in this darkness. The only way to see light is the only way to see the true morality is only if you tie yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Torah, to what God said, because you're in an infinitely small brain. You cannot go and figure out what is right and what is wrong in the deep matters of what the world represents and all the issues that delve with it. Yes, you can learn from it, and you can take things out and you can apply it to your life to learn it in the positive way and try to figure out how. But you need the foundation of the Torah. You need the foundation of what God said, because God created. This is the instruction manual. You cannot come to the correct conclusion unless you go through this instruction manual. And that's why you have also the Christian world and the Islamic world, and they think that they're correct, to the point that they're willing to give up their life for their belief. But a quick review, a quick oversight, a looking about, like, wait a minute, Christian and Islam both believe in the Torah. A quick comparison shows that they do not listen to the Torah at all. They contradict the Torah. There are so many questions that just stand out that don't make any sense. If you're a Christian, if you're the Islamic faith, they just don't line up. So wait a minute, if you believe in God, then believe in the right way, and and that's only the Torah. And that, explains Rabbi Victor Miller, is the darkness that so many people live in. But it's easy to say that other people live in darkness, but we don't look at our own lives, that we also live in darkness. We have issues, everybody has things that they're going through, and we don't see sometimes the light in it. And if you feel like you're going through darkness, that means that you have to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to turn to the Torah, you have to turn and look to see where the light is and how you're going to go and bring light into your house and see clarity in your life. And that is, says the Chadush Arim, that those that immerse themselves in learning Torah and refining their Yirah Shamayim, they're the ones who are going to be able to see the light. They're the ones who are going to be able to show empathy to other people. So continuing with the Makkah, this was the first 3 days, right? Going on to the next 3 days. The next 3 days, the plague intensified. It was 4 times greater than the first 3 days, and it was so dark, and the fog was so dense that wherever the Egyptians' position was on that 4th day, they were frozen, right? So they were like stuck. If they sat, they couldn't get up. 3 days, 3 nights, they were frozen. If they stood up, they couldn't get up. 3 days and 3 nights, they were frozen in place. They were not able to shift position. They were not able to do anything. During this time, when the Egyptians were frozen in their place, the Jewish people came into their homes, to Egyptian homes, and starting to go and look around the home, seeing the dining room, seeing the living room, looking at all their expensive jewelry that they had. They didn't take a single thing, but they looked around. And the Jewish people had light. The Egyptians had the darkness. This plague. One of the reasons why the Jewish people did this is because when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the Jewish people, go and borrow things from the Egyptians. Go and borrow the utensils. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Abraham Avinu that the Jewish people, they will go out b'rechush gadol. They will go out with a tremendous wealth. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, listen, went through the slavery, now you're going to go through the other aspect as well, as that is leave with great wealth as well. They're going to get even greater wealth in the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but they left with great wealth. So they went to borrow that. So the Egyptians could say, wait a minute, I don't have any jewelry. But I go, no, wait a minute. Yeah, in the third drawer, you have these pearl earrings. Yeah, I want to borrow that. You also have this Rolex watch, which, I want to go and I want to take that. And they give exact directions of where everything was. And because this plague came unannounced, meaning there was no warning, so the Egyptians weren't able to hide anything. Everything was just laid out wherever it was, and they were able to go around and see everything where the location was and what they had. Now, during this time, the Egyptians, even though there were complete darkness, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave visions to the Egyptians. There were visions of the Jewish people rejoicing, having a good time, walking around their house. They had these visions of what they saw, which made everything that they're going through so much more difficult. Ooh, excuse me. Sorry. So. Oh, that was... Let's just move on. The Chassam Sofer brings down that the Jewish people saw frightening images. They weren't... Besides the fact that they saw the Jewish people, they had images of the Jewish people, the Chassam Sofer said they also saw very frightening images. And the images was that they saw that this Makkah came with, unfortunately, with demons and with evil spirits. So talk about a fearsome, scenario. You're stuck, you cannot move, and then to take matters worse, you're dealing with demons and evil spirits. So, and not only that, to make matters even worse, during this plague, the lice and boils return. Now, why the lice and boils specifically return? Because those are things that you need to itch. You need to move around. You need to you need to get rid of it. The Egyptians were not able to do that because they were frozen. And imagine, right now, yeah, you're thinking, you're listening to the class, whatever it is that you're doing, right? Just imagine you have an itch on your nose, but don't itch it. But imagine it's on the tip, on the right side, there's a little itch and you just want to scratch it. There's nothing there, but you feel like there's something there. You need to just do it. Imagine somebody, you feel like you have an itch and you can't do it. Now that's painful. But imagine somebody has a boil there. And it's something that boils that were extremely itchy. It wasn't just a regular itch. Imagine how difficult it is not to touch it. But now let's take it a step up. Imagine you have a little bug crawling on that boil, the lice. And all you want to do is just rip it, just scratch with a rake or something. You want to rip it off, but they were frozen. So I had these boils and they had these bugs that were crawling over them. If you just begin to picture the scenario, the joke, that unfortunately was going, I don't know, I heard this a long time ago, many years ago. You have these advertisements where they go and say for a nickel a day, you could feed a child in Africa, a full thing. I don't know where they can get that type of money for that type of, for just a quarter a day or for just a nickel a day. But, and they show these little kids that, never have any hair. You could always see their ribs, and they have flies that are just flying everywhere. And then a fly lands on the eye and they're not blinking, and they'll fly. Imagine that, you just want to get rid of it. Can you begin to understand that level of it's suffering with annoyance to a whole other level. They just want to itch everywhere, but they're frozen. And they can't do anything. And they want to scratch. And there are bugs that are crawling over them. And then they see these evil spirits and demons. And, just for clarity purposes, we're not going to get into this. If you want, you could go look and listen to our demons class that we gave me 5-6 years ago. They don't look like rainbows and butterflies, right? They're not the nicest looking creatures, let's just call it. And these are the visions that they're dealing with. You can begin to imagine the pain and the suffering that these Egyptians are going through. Now, this lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. So all the plagues generally lasted for 7 days. The plague, the makkah of darkness, lasted only 6 days, because the seventh day, that's going to happen in Kriyas Yamsuf, in the splitting of the sea. So finally, Pharaoh goes and screams, Moshe Rabbeinu, I wanted this done with. He calls Moshe Rabbeinu and says, I have a new offer for you, says Pharaoh. He said, take the woman, you could take the children, but the animals, they need to stay. Now, the Imam Laws brings this down. He says, you know how Pharaoh worded this? Pharaoh really didn't want the Jewish people to go out. Now, again, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu went and he, hardened Pharaoh's heart. But Pharaoh was not interested in letting the Jewish people leave, right? Pharaoh, this was the crux of the economy. Pharaoh was the one that was this was like free labor. You're talking about the Egyptian economy thrived on Jewish slavery. So he did not want the Jewish people to leave. So Pharaoh goes, and Pharaoh was kind of like very careful in how he used his words. He was hedging his words on utilizing it very, very carefully and saying certain things and what not to say. So Pharaoh did not say, oh, go worship your God with your children. Just let the animals remain. No, Pharaoh said, go worship your God. Just let your sheep and cattle remain behind. And if you go and if you look at it in the Pesachim, you can see that how this terminology was said. And then he said, oh, and also your children can go with you. Explains the Imam Laws. You know how Pharaoh was saying this? Pharaoh really did not want the children to go. So Pharaoh said, go worship your God. Just let your sheep and cattle remain behind. Meaning that he wanted to stop the sentence right there. But he was looking at Moshe Rabbeinu. He was trying to see what Moshe Rabbeinu, what's that Moshe? And he saw Moshe Rabbeinu was he was getting ready to fight back. And then, oh, also your children can go with you. Meaning that Pharaoh originally did not even want to let the children go. But now finally he said, okay, fine. He saw that he couldn't get away with it. He said, fine. So he said that the men can go, the women can go, the children can go. Just leave the cattle behind. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, no deal. Not going to deal to this. The ceasefire is not a good deal. He says, Moshe replied, we take all our animals. So Pharaoh says, what do you mean? You don't need all the animals. You have so many animals, right? Their animals didn't die. The Jewish animals didn't die. Says, you have, if you leave your animals, I know that you have so many animals. You have so much wealth over here. You're going to come back. If you don't leave your animals, how do I know that you're going to come back? You want to go and serve your God. Go and serve your God. Just leave your animals over here. So Moshe Rabbeinu responded. He says, not only are we going to take all our animals, but you, your wife, your servants, you're also going to give us animals to go and sacrifice to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Response to Pharaoh, why do you need so many animals? How many animals do you need? So Moshe Rabbeinu responded, says, we don't know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to require of us. We don't know what Hashem, wants us to sacrifice. So we got to bring everything. So Pharaoh got very upset and he sort of kicked him out. But the Chidush HaRim brings down that, or our friend brings us down that what does it mean that we don't know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to serve? He says these words, says the Chidush HaRim, you can apply to every single Jew. It says we do not know how successful we were in serving God. We don't know, right? Everybody lives their life. Everybody has their tests. Everybody has their situations. We don't know how good we had, how successful we were in our mission. When will you know? After 120, you come into the world to come, and we could see what percentage, what accomplishment we had based off our original mission. And we see that there's a story in the Gemara in Bava Basra on page 10b. That said, there was a Moira, Yosef Braid Rav Yeshua, that had an out-of-body experience. He left his body, he went into the next world, and he came back into his body, and his father asked him, says, what did you see in the next world? So out-of-body experience means that you temporarily died and you came back to this world. So the Yosef Braid Rav Yeshua says, Olam hafach ra'isi, I saw an upside-down word, El Yonim, the people that in this world are considered very, very high, very prestigious. In the next world, I saw them very, very low. But the tachtainim, the people that are very low in this world over here, I saw them very high in the next world. Meaning that you see people that are very talented and very successful, and they give a lot of everything of their time, their money, that's stuck, or whatever it is that they're giving, and they're teaching, and they're doing so much. But they are, when they get to the next world, they're not on the highest level. They're very low level. Why? Because considering their talents, considering their abilities, they could have accomplished so much more. Such a scary thought. Whoa. Such a scary thought, meaning like you never know, like, okay, I was a good Jew. But like you never know what you really are meant to accomplish over here. As opposed to sometimes you see people that are very low, they're not successful, right? They go to minyan, maybe they're able to learn a little bit here and there, they're able to do something, they're dressing tznius, it's very difficult for them. You see that, okay, fine, they're regular, simple Jews, and they're very low on the totem pole, but the next role says Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Shua that they were very, very high because they were able to accomplish so much in their mission in this world. And this explains the Chidush Arim. We don't know. We don't know where we stand. We don't know where we hold in our level in Avodas Hashem and where we are, and compared to what we, like accomplished in this world. You know that the Pharaoh hears what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, and he says, "Listen," he says, for whatever reason, Pharaoh said, "Oh wait, you're going to take your animals." He kicked them out. He says, "I want you to get out of here. I don't want to see you again. Don't ever come here again." And Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Yeah, you know what? You spoke very properly. I'm not going to come here again." He says, "But don't, Moshe Rabbeinu even said, I'm not going to give another plague, but you're not out. There is going to be another one coming, and that is going to be delivered by none other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself." Now we know we didn't speak about this yet because we have to speak about the measure for measure. Everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is midah keneged midah. What is the reason? So we spoke about a few ideas that the Egyptians were very blinded, and the Pharaoh was very blinded. He couldn't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu straight out. But let's look at all the reasons of why everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, everything that God does, there is a reason for it, and there is an exact reason for it. Meaning everything is measure for measure. So the Egyptians were punished with the plague of darkness because they would force the Jewish people, the slaves, to hold a candle on their head and balance it. And if it fell off, they were punished by death. So now, because of that, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished them with darkness. As you force the Jewish people to have light for you, now you're going to deal with darkness. The next reason is that the Egyptians imprisoned the Jewish people in dark cells, in dark prisons. Now the Egyptians will be trapped in darkness. The Egyptians would force the Jewish people to work very late into the night. And now the Egyptians will be stuck in the darkness because they forced the Jewish people to work late at night. The Egyptian also brought the darkness of the exile to the Jewish people. Now the Egyptians will be suffering the darkness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu blinded the Egyptians, so to speak, put the darkness in them because they turned a blind eye to the suffering of all the Jews. The Egyptians also, and this is something we spoke about extensively, they did not open their eyes to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was 8 plagues that happened previously. They did not see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "You're not looking? So it's fine. You don't deserve your vision." And HaKadosh Baruch Hu took brought darkness and brought a plague of darkness they weren't able to see. And in addition, Egyptians were sun worshippers. They were sun worshippers, and this also ended up landing into the Christian religion. They served the sun, and that's why Egyptian gods, they had a halo. And they had a halo behind their head. Why? Because that represents the god of the sun. Now, when you look at the Christian, whatever, either you talk about their angels or you talk about their god, whatever it is, there's always a halo behind it because they took this aspect from Egyptian idolatry. So the Egyptians would serve the sun. The sun gave them tremendous amount of power, gave them warmth, it made the crops grow. So the Egyptians were sun worshippers, and hence the plague of darkness showed the ineffectiveness, the powerlessness of the sun. In addition to that, the Kli Yakar brings down that the women were forced to give birth in darkness. They wouldn't want to show the Egyptians that they're giving birth because if it was a boy, they would be thrown into the river, they would be killed. So and besides giving birth in darkness, they also had to hide their children in darkness. And Yocheved, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu had to be hidden in darkness. Yocheved, his mother, had to hide him in darkness. The Chassam Sofer brings down that the Jewish people, the Egyptians caused the Jewish people to be afraid of every little thing. When you torture somebody, when you bring someone to talk about PTSD to a whole nother level, when you put someone in such a difficult situation, then they get scared of everything. So now HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed, you made the Jewish people scared of everything. Now you're going to be scared of everything. There's going to be lice. There's going to be boils. There's going to be itching. There's going to be visions. You're going to be scared of every sound, everything that touches you. You're not going to be able to see it. You don't know what's going on. You don't know if it's a tarantula or if it's a little lice. You just feel something moving on your back. You feel something crawling on your face, but you cannot do anything about it. So you're going to be scared of everything, just like you made the Jewish people scared of everything. HaKadosh Baruch Hu also decreed that the Jewish people be enslaved. This was part of the decree. So why the Egyptians got punished? And the answer is because the Egyptians brought additional darkness, additional suffering to the Jewish people. So because they brought additional, that's why they got the punishment of darkness. And finally, the Jewish people are compared to light. They're a light to the nations. They're compared to light. And because the Egyptians went and they tried to annihilate the nation of light, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed the light, from them. I want to finish off with one interesting thought, and that is the Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein brings us down that David HaMelech brings down most of the makkahs, but he doesn't start with the makkah of dam. And this is, if you want to look at it in Tehillim chapter 105. Verse 28. He starts off with what? With the makkah of choshech. Why? Why does David HaMelech start with the makkah of choshech? And you could speak about this on your Seder. The basis of the Seder is emunah. The basis of the Seder is you're learning, you're teaching yourself, you're teaching your family, your children, your spouse, your parents. It's all about emunah. When the Jewish people were in Egypt, they were oppressed, they were mistreated, they felt powerless, they were in the lowest level. Once the plagues started, all of a sudden the Egyptians were vulnerable. They were put in a position that we were no longer on top. But they always had some sort of they're still the controlling aspect of it. But comes Makas Choshech, the Egyptians were powerless. They were frozen. They couldn't do anything. If there would be a time when the Jewish people would be able to just walk right out of Egypt, the plague of darkness would be the perfect time. The Egyptians were frozen in place for 3 days. The Jewish people could have walked right out and not a single person could have prevented them. But they didn't. They stayed inside Mitzrayim. And the answer is why? Why did they stay inside Mitzrayim? And this explains, and Rav Baruch Halevi brings it down by the Rabbi version, the reason why is that the Jewish people realize that there's something going on over here. They had emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had a plan. And God did not tell them to leave Egypt yet. They could have left, could have walked right out. They could have walked right out and they could have taken all Egyptian gold and silver. They could have killed the entire... They could have done so much damage, but they didn't. They just stood back. Why? Not because they were cowards. The Jewish people are very fierce. Look at the Israelis. They don't stand down. Then why didn't they just leave? Because they had emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God didn't tell us to leave. It says we see what's going on. The Jewish people that survived the plague of darkness realize that there is a reason and everything is programmed over here. If God didn't tell us to leave yet, then we're staying right where we are. And that is why David HaMelech started off with this makkah. Start off with the makkah of choshech, because the night of the Seder is a night of emunah. It's a night of instilling emunah into each and every single one of us. V'hisha amda la'avesenu. This stood over our HaKadosh Baruch Hu stood over us, that in every generation they tried to kill us, but we have the emunah and bitachon, and we stick strong with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what the HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us. This is the emunah of Makas Choshech, and this is why David HaMelech lists Makas Choshech as the first one in this. And here we begin to see the beauty and the intricacy of this makkah and how much we can go and expound about it and learn about it and really take to ourselves of what we could take away from this. You could take away from this, darkness is not only in what we appear as light and dark, but in our own life, in our own emotions, in our own intellect, we have this darkness and we have this lightness. We have the ability to go and choose lightness. And you know how do you choose light and you avoid the makkah of choshech in our own life? Is you cleave and you connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You work on your Shemayim and you work on your Emunah, and you're able to bring that light to you. And with that, before we open up to any questions, we will say a kapitel Tehillim like we do for the nation, the Klal Yisrael, and the soldiers in the fight, in the war in Gaza. It's not anymore in Gaza, it's also in the north as well. As usual, we say kapitel Kuf Lamed, say it along with us, and then we will open up to any questions. Shir Malais, Mima Amakim, Karasicha Adonai. Adonai Shema bekoili tiena aznecha kashu vais the kol tachanunai im avoinos tish Maria Adonai mi amoid ki imcha aslicha leman tivare ki visi Adonai kiv sanafshi vilidvarai achalti nafshi ladonai mishamim labayker shamim labayker yachel Yisrael El Adonai ki ma Adonai achazed varbei my fedus v'hu yifteis Yisrael mikol avenesav. Achenu kol beis Yisrael, hanesunim batzara v'ashivya, ha'oimdim bein bayam uvein bayabasha, ha'makim yirachem aleim, v'yatziem mitzara l'revacha, ma'fela le'ara, m'shiba le'gula, hashta bagala bezman kariv v'nemar amen.